The holographic display above the war table showed humanity's defensive positions like scattered pearls against an ocean of hostile red markers. Commander Sarah Chen rubbed her temples, trying to ignore the caffeine withdrawal headache that had been building for the past 6 hours. When you're planning the defense of 3-star systems against an empire that considers genocide a valid military strategy, sleep becomes a luxury you can't afford. The Zarathi fleet movements suggest a 3-pronged assault, Admiral Rodriguez was saying, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been fighting this war longer than most recruits had been alive. Primary strike against Kepler Station, secondary forces targeting the mining colonies, and Sarah's attention drifted from the tactical briefing to the faces around the circular table. She'd worked with most of these officers for months, memorizing their expressions, their habits, their particular brands of military pessimism. But today there was someone new. The woman stood near the far side of the table, partially obscured by the hovering display of enemy fleet positions. She wore armor that seemed to blend ceremonial tradition with practical function, polished plates that caught the light like mirrors, yet clearly designed for actual combat rather than parade grounds. Her silver hair was braided with small metallic ornaments that Sarah's tactical mind automatically catalogued as either decorations or miniaturized equipment. But it was her ears that marked her as non-human. They swept upward and back in elegant curves, longer and more pointed than any human ear had a right to be. The effect was striking rather than alien, as if someone had taken human features and simply refined them. Chen, what's your assessment of the Eastern approach vectors? Admiral Rodriguez's voice cut through her observation. Sarah blinked, forcing her attention back to the strategic situation. The Zarathi favor overwhelming force along predictable routes, sir. If we can convince them we're weaker on the eastern flank, they might commit more resources there than tactically sound. Elaborate. Fake a supply shortage. Pull back our obvious defensive positions, make it look like we're consolidating due to resource constraints. When they overcommit to what appears to be our weak point, we hit them with everything we've actually got hidden in the asteroid fields. The mysterious woman's head tilted slightly, and Sarah caught a glimpse of green eyes that seemed to be evaluating her tactical reasoning with professional interest. Risky, Admiral Rodriguez mused. If they see through the deception. They won't, Sarah interrupted, then caught herself. Sorry, sir. What I mean is, the Zarathi have a cultural blind spot when it comes to apparent weakness. Their honor codes make them view strategic retreat as cowardice rather than tactics. They'll see what they expect to see. And what makes you so certain of Zarathi psychology, Commander? The question came from the silver-haired woman, her voice carrying an accent Sarah couldn't place, something that suggested distant stars and formal military training. Sarah met her gaze directly. Because I've been studying their tactics for 3 years, and they're remarkably consistent in their arrogance. They've never encountered an enemy that used misdirection as a primary strategy, so they don't look for it. The woman nodded slowly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both approval and evaluation. An interesting perspective. Captain Nightwind brings extensive experience with unconventional warfare, Admiral Rodriguez said. Her unit has been effective against Zarathi forces in the Outer Rim. Sarah tried not to stare, but found herself cataloging details with the same intensity she usually reserved for enemy fleet compositions. The way Captain Nightwind held herself suggested someone accustomed to command, to being listened to and obeyed. Her armor bore markings that looked like battle honors, though from conflicts Sarah didn't recognize. The misdirection strategy has merit, Captain Nightwind continued, but it assumes the Zarathi won't adapt their approach based on new intelligence. What if they've learned from recent engagements? Then we adapt faster, Sarah replied. The advantage of being the underdog is that you have to be more creative than your enemy. They have superior numbers and firepower, but they also have the inflexibility that comes with success. Captain Nightwind's lips curved in what might have been approval. You think like a warrior, Commander Chen. I think like someone who doesn't want to see humanity wiped out by an empire that views us as an inconvenient pest problem, Sarah corrected. Sometimes that requires warrior-like thinking. The briefing continued for another hour, with various officers presenting intelligence reports, supply assessments, and casualty projections that made Sarah's headache worse. But she found herself increasingly aware of Captain Nightwind's presence, the way she listened with complete focus, occasionally asking questions that revealed both tactical brilliance and a perspective shaped by experiences Sarah couldn't imagine. When Admiral Rodriguez finally dismissed the briefing, Sarah lingered near the holographic display, ostensibly reviewing the defensive positions but actually trying to work up the courage to approach the mysterious captain. Professional curiosity, she told herself. Learning about alien tactical doctrine was part of her job. Commander Chen. Captain Nightwind's voice came from directly behind her, close enough that Sarah could catch the scent of something like pine forests and distant rain. Sarah turned, finding herself looking up slightly to meet those remarkable green eyes. Captain Nightwind. I was hoping to discuss your assessment of the Eastern approach strategy. Were you? There was amusement in the captain's voice. Because from my observation, you spent most of the briefing looking at me rather than the tactical displays. Heat flooded Sarah's cheeks. She'd been caught conducting reconnaissance on a fellow officer like some academy cadet with a crush. I apologize if I was unprofessional. I was just. Why are you staring? Captain Nightwind asked directly, her head tilted at an angle that suggested genuine curiosity rather than offense. Sarah opened her mouth to offer some excuse about studying alien tactical doctrine or professional interest in new allies. Instead, the truth came out before her military training could stop it. Because you're dazzling. The words hung in the air between them like an admission of strategic weakness. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment, waiting for the polite dismissal or professional rebuke that would follow such an inappropriate comment. Instead, she watched in fascination as Captain Nightwind blinked once, slowly, and then a soft flush of color bloomed across her cheeks. The composed military officer seemed suddenly uncertain, her usual confidence wavering like a shield that had taken an unexpected hit. I see, Captain Nightwind said quietly, her accent becoming more pronounced as if the surprise had disrupted her careful control over human language patterns. Sarah realized she was witnessing something remarkable. A seasoned warrior who could face down Zarathi battle fleets was blushing because of a compliment. The discovery was somehow more tactically significant than any intelligence report she'd ever filed. The awkward silence stretched between them like the neutral zone between opposing fleets, until Captain Nightwind cleared her throat with the precision of someone accustomed to regaining tactical advantage. I should clarify, she said, her composure returning like armor sliding back into place. My people, the Sylvani, typically conduct military discourse with considerably more formality than humans appear to prefer. Sarah felt her embarrassment transform into curiosity. Sylvani? I don't think I've seen your species in any of the coalition briefings before this week. We prefer to remain strategically autonomous, Captain Nightwind replied. The Sylvan Protectorate joined the coalition only recently, when it became clear that the Zarathi expansion threatened more than just human colonies. And they sent you as their representative? They sent me because I volunteered. Something in her tone suggested there was more to that story, but before Sarah could ask, Captain Nightwind gestured toward the now empty holographic display. Your misdirection strategy, it has potential, but you're thinking too conventionally about implementation. Sarah blinked at the subject change, then realized the captain was offering professional conversation as an escape from personal awkwardness. She could work with that. How so? You assume the Zarathi will respond to apparent weakness with a straightforward assault. But what if we convinced them that our weakness was actually a trap? A trap within a trap. Sarah's tactical mind began racing. Make them think we want them to attack our fake weak point, so they avoid it entirely. Precisely. The Zarathi pride themselves on tactical sophistication. If they believe they've seen through our deception, they'll feel superior and confident in their counter-strategy. Sarah pulled up the tactical display again, her fingers dancing across the controls to show fleet positions. So we make the Eastern approach look like an obvious trap, knowing they'll avoid it and concentrate on what appears to be our real strength, which is actually where we want them to attack anyway. Now you're thinking like a Sylvani, Captain Nightwind said, and Sarah caught what might have been approval in her voice. They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, adjusting defensive positions and supply routes with the easy collaboration of two minds that process strategy in compatible ways. Sarah found herself stealing glances at her companion, noting the way Captain Nightwind's ears twitched slightly when she was concentrating, or how her fingers moved across the controls with dancer's grace. "Commander Chen," Captain Nightwind said without looking up from the display, "may I ask you something?" "Of course. Do all humans express personal observations so directly? Or is this a particular trait of yours?" Sarah laughed, surprising herself. "Oh no, this is definitely a personal trait. Most humans would have found some tactful way to mention your strategic insights or asked about Sylvani military doctrine. I just have a terrible habit of saying exactly what I'm thinking." "And what were you thinking?" The question was asked casually, but Sarah caught an undertone that suggested the answer mattered more than professional curiosity would warrant. "I was thinking that whoever trained you in combat tactics did an exceptional job, and that the Zarathi have no idea what they're up against if the Sylvan Protectorate fights like you plan." Captain Nightwind's fingers paused over the controls. "That's not what you were thinking in the briefing room." Sarah felt her cheeks warm again. "No, in the briefing room I was thinking that you're probably the most beautiful person I've ever seen, and wondering what it says about my priorities that I can be distracted by someone's appearance in the middle of planning humanity's survival." The honesty surprised even Sarah. She'd meant to deflect with humor or redirect to safer topics, but something about Captain Nightwind's direct questions seemed to bypass her usual filters. "Beautiful," Captain Nightwind repeated, as if testing the word. Sylvani don't typically use such terms in professional contexts. What do Sylvani use instead? Efficient. Tactically sound. Competent. Captain Nightwind's lips curved in what Sarah was learning to recognize as her version of a smile. Beautiful is more personal. It is, Sarah agreed. I probably shouldn't have said it. Why not? The question caught Sarah off guard. Because we're in the middle of a war, we barely know each other, and I'm supposed to be a professional military officer, not someone who gets distracted by. She stopped, realizing she was about to dig herself deeper into personal territory that had no place in a military alliance. Distracted by what, Commander Chen? Sarah met Captain Nightwind's gaze directly. By the way someone moves like they're dancing even when they're planning battle strategies. By wondering what those ornaments in your hair represent, and whether they're earned or inherited. By curiosity about whether all Sylvani have that particular shade of green eyes, or if it's uniquely yours. Captain Nightwind was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice carried a formality that hadn't been there before. Commander, I should inform you that the Sylvan Protectorate has specific protocols regarding personal relationships with allied military personnel. Sarah's heart sank. She'd pushed too far, been too direct, turned professional cooperation into something inappropriate. Of course. I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable, Captain. It won't happen again. The protocols, Captain Nightwind continued as if Sarah hadn't spoken, state that such relationships must be declared to commanding officers within 72 hours of their initiation, and that both parties must undergo psychological evaluation to ensure that personal feelings don't compromise tactical judgment. Sarah blinked. What? The protocols also state, Captain Nightwind said, her formal tone beginning to crack, that failure to declare mutual attraction can result in disciplinary action for both officers involved. Mutual? Sarah's voice came out higher than intended. Captain Nightwind's careful composure finally broke entirely, and she laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of silver bells. Commander Chen, did you think you were the only one stealing glances during the briefing? I spent most of Admiral Rodriguez's presentation wondering whether all humans had such expressive eyes, or if yours were particularly distracting. Sarah felt the tactical situation shift in her favor. So when I called you dazzling? When you called me dazzling, Captain Nightwind said, her blush returning, it was the first compliment I'd received in approximately 7 years that had nothing to do with my kill ratio or strategic efficiency. It was unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? Definitely good unexpected. Captain Nightwind's smile was genuine now, transforming her from composed military officer to someone Sarah very much wanted to know better. Though I should warn you, Sylvani courtship traditions involve significantly more formal poetry than humans typically expect. I can work with poetry, Sarah said. As long as you can work with someone who speaks before thinking and gets distracted by beautiful warriors during important briefings. I think, Captain Nightwind said, that could be an acceptable tactical arrangement. Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's communication system crackling to life with Admiral Rodriguez's voice, now edged with urgency. All senior staff to the command center immediately. Long-range sensors have detected massive Zarathi fleet movement toward the Kepler colonies. ETA 47 hours. Sarah and Captain Nightwind exchanged glances, their moment of personal connection suddenly overshadowed by the reality of impending battle. Looks like we'll have to continue this conversation later, Sarah said. Count on it, Commander Chen, Captain Nightwind replied, her warriors' focus already returning. But first, we have a war to win. The command center buzzed with controlled chaos as officers scrambled to process incoming intelligence. Sarah had seen this particular brand of military panic before, the kind that happened when everyone suddenly realized the theoretical war they'd been planning for was about to become devastatingly real. Kepler colonies, 3 million civilians, Admiral Rodriguez announced to the assembled staff. The Zarathi fleet is massive, over 200 ships, including at least 15 dreadnoughts. They'll arrive in 46 hours, 37 minutes. Sarah studied the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet. The numbers were worse than their worst-case scenarios, but something about the formation bothered her. Sir, their approach vector is almost textbook perfect. No deviation for asteroid fields, no adjustment for gravitational anomalies. It's like they're not expecting any resistance at all. Maybe they're not, Captain Nightwind said from beside her. Kepler is primarily a civilian colony. Minimal defensive installations, no significant military presence. Which makes it perfect for testing new weapons, Sarah realized with growing dread. Admiral, I don't think this is a conquest fleet. I think it's a field test. Admiral Rodriguez turned to face her. Explain. The formation is wrong for an invasion. Too many heavy ships, not enough transports for occupation forces. They're bringing overwhelming firepower to crush a target that can't fight back. Sarah's fingers flew over the tactical controls, highlighting specific ship classes in the enemy formation. This isn't about taking territory. They want to see how effectively they can destroy it. Captain Nightwind leaned closer to study the display, close enough that Sarah could smell that pine and rain scent again. If Commander Chen is correct, then conventional defense strategies are useless. You can't protect civilians from weapons designed to eliminate them completely. My squadron could run reconnaissance, Captain Nightwind continued. Get close enough to assess what new technologies they're testing. Absolutely not, Admiral Rodriguez said. Sylvani stealth ships are valuable assets. We can't risk. With respect, Admiral, Sarah interrupted, Captain Nightwind is right. We need intelligence on whatever new weapons they're bringing, and reconnaissance is our only option for getting it. Commander Chen, you're a tactical analyst, not a field operative. Then it's a good thing I'm volunteering to go with Captain Nightwind, Sarah said, ignoring the startled looks from around the command center. Someone with knowledge of human defensive capabilities needs to assess how these new weapons might be used against our other colonies. Captain Nightwind turned to stare at her. Commander, reconnaissance missions carry significant personal risk. And you have no combat training beyond theoretical knowledge. I have a graduate degree in xenotechnology analysis and 3 years of studying Zarathi tactical doctrine, Sarah replied. Plus, I'm small enough to fit in a Sylvani scout ship without affecting its stealth capabilities. This is highly irregular, Admiral Rodriguez said. So is facing an enemy that can erase entire planets, Sarah countered. Irregular situations require irregular solutions. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the hangar bay staring at what Captain Nightwind had called a small reconnaissance vessel. The ship looked like someone had taken the concept of aerodynamic efficiency and sculpted it from liquid silver. It was beautiful, organic in a way that human ships never achieved, with lines that suggested it had grown rather than been built. Whisper of stars *, Captain Nightwind said, running her hand along the ship's hull with obvious affection. She's been my partner for 5 years. It's gorgeous, Sarah said. Also significantly smaller than I expected. Sylvani engineering prioritizes efficiency over comfort. The stealth systems require a compact design. Captain Nightwind opened what Sarah assumed was a hatch, though she couldn't see any obvious seams until the hull simply opened. I should warn you, the accommodations are quite close. Sarah peered into the ship's interior and realized that quite close was a masterpiece of understatement. The cabin contained 2 seats, a bewildering array of controls, and approximately enough free space for a claustrophobic butterfly. Well, she said, this should be interesting. For hours into their journey toward the Zarathi fleet, Sarah had to admit that interesting hadn't quite covered it. The ship's interior was undeniably cramped, but Captain Nightwind, call me Zara, she'd said once they were underway, had been surprisingly good company. So Sylvani military training includes poetry composition? Sarah asked, watching Zara's graceful fingers dance across controls that responded to touch like living things. Poetry, philosophy, combat meditation, and what you might call interpretive dance, Zara replied. Sylvani believed that warfare without artistry is merely violence. Interpretive dance seems like an unusual military skill. You'd be surprised how many tactical principles can be expressed through movement. Balance, timing, reading your opponent's intentions, it's all connected. Sarah found herself imagining Zara dancing and had to force her attention back to the mission briefing data. Tell me about your homeworld. What's it like growing up in a civilization that values warrior poets? Zara's expression softened. Imagine forests that have never been cut, where the cities grow within living trees that have stood for millennia. Children learn to read the wind's patterns and water's songs before they learn written language. When they're old enough, they choose whether to tend the forests, study the stars, or defend our borders. And you chose to defend. I chose to explore, Zara corrected. The Protectorate sends warriors to distant systems not just for intelligence, but to understand how other civilizations approach the art of living. Meeting humans has been educational. Educational how? Zara glanced at her with that almost smile. Humans say exactly what they're thinking, even when it's tactically inadvisable. It's refreshing. Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's proximity alarms. Through the forward viewport, Sarah could see the distant glow of the Zarathi fleet, spread across space like a constellation of malevolent stars. Beginning passive scans, Zara announced, her voice shifting to professional focus. If their new weapons are based on known physics, we should be able to identify them from energy signatures. Sarah watched the scanner displays begin populating with data, her analytical training automatically cataloging ship classes and weapon configurations. But something was wrong with the readings. Zara, look at this energy signature from their flagship. It doesn't match any known Zarathi technology. Zara leaned over to study Sarah's display, bringing them close enough that Sarah could see the concentration lines around her green eyes. Those readings suggest massive power consumption, but for what? It's not propulsion or conventional weapons. Sarah's blood chilled as understanding dawned. It's a test firing. They're about to demonstrate their new weapon. Through the viewport, they watched in horror as the Zarathi flagship's main weapon charged with energies that made space itself seem to ripple. The target was a small, uninhabited moon orbiting a gas giant, chosen, Sarah realized, for the same reason scientists choose petri dishes for experiments. The weapon fired. Sarah had expected an energy beam, an explosion, something dramatic and violent. Instead, a sphere of absolute nothingness appeared around the moon. Not darkness, nothingness. An absence so complete that her eyes refused to process it. The sphere expanded slowly, and where it touched the moon's surface, matter simply stopped existing. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "Quantum dissolution," Zara said, her voice tight with recognition. "They've weaponized the forces that hold atoms together." Sarah's analytical mind raced through the implications. If they can disrupt quantum bonds on that scale, then conventional shields, armor, even planetary defenses are useless. They could erase entire fleets, whole worlds, without leaving a trace. The sphere of nothingness stabilized after consuming roughly a third of the moon, leaving behind a perfectly spherical void that hurt to look at directly. "We have to get this information back to the fleet," Sarah said. "Agreed. But first..." Zara's instruments began screaming warnings. "They've detected us. Stealth compromised." Sarah felt her stomach drop as Zarathi fighter craft appeared on their sensors, moving to intercept. "How fast can this ship go?" "Fast enough," Zara replied, her hands flying over the controls. "But not fast enough to outrun that." She pointed to the main display, where the massive Zarathi flagship was turning toward their position. Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that they were about to become the second test of the quantum dissolution weapon. "Zara," she said quietly, "I have an idea. But you're not going to like it. Tell me. What if we don't run? What if we get closer?" Zara stared at her. "That weapon just erased 1/3 of a moon, Sarah. Getting closer seems tactically inadvisable. But it's also quantum-based technology, which means it operates on principles of particle entanglement and waveform collapse." Sarah's academic training kicked into overdrive. "If we could get close enough to plant quantum communicators on their hull, we might be able to create a feedback loop that would turn their own weapon against them," Zara finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Sarah, that's brilliant. Also probably suicidal." "Probably," Sarah agreed. "But if that weapon reaches human colonies, millions of people will simply cease to exist. Someone has to try." Zara looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something shift in those remarkable green eyes. "In Sylvani culture, we have a saying, the forest remembers those who sacrifice themselves for the sake of future growth. Is that your way of saying yes?" "That's my way of saying," Zara replied, already adjusting their course toward the massive enemy flagship, "that I've never met anyone worth risking everything for before. But you might be the exception." As they raced toward what was almost certainly their destruction, Sarah realized that she'd found something worth fighting for beyond humanity's survival, and it was sitting right beside her, flying them both toward impossible odds with unwavering courage. Flying toward a ship capable of erasing you from existence, Sarah discovered, provided remarkable clarity about one's priorities. As Zara piloted the Whisper of Stars through a gauntlet of Zarathi fighters, dodging plasma fire with movements that were indeed very much like interpretive dance, Sarah found herself thinking less about quantum mechanics and more about regrets. 20 seconds to the flagship's hull, Zara announced, her voice steady despite the ship shuddering under near-miss explosions. "The quantum communicators are programmed for automatic deployment, but someone needs to manually activate the feedback sequence." "Someone meaning me," Sarah said, already reaching for the manual controls. "Sarah." Zara's hand covered hers. "If this doesn't work." "It'll work," Sarah interrupted. "And if it doesn't, at least we'll have tried something impossible instead of something safe." Zara's smile was brilliant enough to power the ship's engines. "I love the way you think." "Good," Sarah said, "because I'm thinking that when we get out of this, I'd like to learn more about Sylvani poetry. And interpretive dance. And whether those protocols about declaring mutual attraction include provisions for combat situations." "They do, actually." Emergency battlefield declarations are considered legally binding if both parties survive the engagement. Sarah blinked. Are you proposing to me while we're about to commit tactical suicide? I'm informing you that Sylvani military law considers us legally partnered if we both live through this, Zara corrected. The proposing comes later, assuming we survive long enough for formal poetry composition. The whisper of stars slammed against the Zarathi flagship's hull with an impact that rattled Sarah's bones. Through the viewport, she could see the quantum weapons charging ports, energy crackling between conduits the size of subway tunnels. Deploying communicators now, Sarah said, her fingers flying over controls she'd studied but never actually used in combat. The ship's quantum communicators shot out like seeds from a dandelion, attaching themselves to critical points along the weapon's superstructure. Feedback loop initiated, she continued, watching quantum entanglement patterns form on her displays. The weapon's own energy should cascade back through its targeting systems in approximately 30 seconds. Should being the operative term, Zara noted, already spinning the ship away from the massive hull. Should being optimistic, Sarah agreed. Reality being that we're about to find out whether theoretical physics works under extreme combat conditions. The Zarathi flagship's weapon began charging again, this time targeting the fleeing whisper of stars. Sarah watched energy readings climb toward levels that could dissolve them from existence, and realized that she was surprisingly calm about the whole thing. Zara, she said, if this goes badly, I want you to know that the last few hours have been the most interesting of my life. Interesting? Zara's eyebrows rose. I take you on a death-defying mission to save civilization, and you call it interesting? I call it the moment I realized I was in love with an alien warrior who blushes at compliments and flies like poetry in motion, Sarah replied. The death-defying part was just a bonus. The weapon fired. For a moment that lasted either seconds or centuries, Sarah watched the sphere of nothingness expand toward their ship, reality unraveling at the edges like fabric coming undone. She had time to think that quantum dissolution was oddly beautiful, like watching the universe forget how to exist. Then the feedback loop engaged. The sphere collapsed back on itself, drawing the weapon's energy into a recursive pattern that turned the flagship's own power against its quantum matrix. Sarah watched in fascination as the dissolution effect reversed course, racing back along the energy conduits toward the weapon's core. The Zarathi flagship's entire forward section simply stopped being. Not destroyed in an explosion of fire and debris, but erased as completely as if it had never existed. The quantum weapon, its creators, and roughly a third of the massive ship ceased to be part of reality's equations. That, Zara said quietly, was either the most brilliant tactical solution or the luckiest accident in military history. Little of both, Sarah admitted, watching the remaining Zarathi ships scatter in confusion as their flagship survivors tried to comprehend what had just happened. Though I prefer to think of it as applied theoretical physics under extreme duress. The space around them erupted in quantum aftershocks, ripples in reality itself that made Sarah's instruments scream warnings about temporal displacement and dimensional instability. She felt something shift inside her head, like someone had suddenly tuned her brain to a frequency she'd never been able to hear before. Sarah. Zara's voice carried concern. Your neural patterns are spiking on my scanners. I can see them, Sarah said wonderingly, watching the quantum aftershocks with perception that went beyond her instruments. The energy patterns, the dimensional fluctuations, I can actually see how spacetime is repairing itself. Zara's own readings showed similar anomalies. The quantum exposure is affecting both of us. I can sense your tactical thoughts, your strategic reasoning. It's like having a second analytical mind overlaying my own. Is that good or bad? Unknown. But definitely unprecedented. Zara guided the ship away from the unstable quantum fields. We need to get back to the fleet. Admiral Rodriguez will want a full report, and we need medical evaluation for quantum field exposure. The journey back to Titan's Edge passed in a haze of debriefing recordings and mutual amazement that they'd survived. Sarah found herself acutely aware of Zara's presence in ways that had nothing to do with the ship's cramped quarters. She could sense the Sylvani's tactical instincts, her emotional responses, even fragments of childhood memories involving tree cities and wind songs. "This is going to complicate the paperwork," Sarah observed as they docked with the orbital fortress. "Which paperwork? The mission report or the Emergency Battlefield Partnership Declaration?" "Both. Though I suspect Admiral Rodriguez is going to be more concerned with how we destroyed a Zarathi superweapon than with Sylvani military marriage customs." Admiral Rodriguez's reaction proved Sarah wrong. After listening to their mission report with the stunned attention of someone watching the laws of physics rewrite themselves, his first question was about their enhanced neural connection. "You're telling me that quantum field exposure has created a permanent psychic link between human and Sylvani consciousness?" he asked, studying the medical reports with obvious fascination. "More like enhanced tactical integration," Sarah corrected. "I can perceive Zara's strategic thinking, and she can access my analytical processes. It's not telepathy exactly, more like shared cognitive resources. Tactically advantageous," Zara added. "But also personally intimate in ways neither of our species has previously experienced." Admiral Rodriguez looked between them with the expression of a man watching his tactical assumptions rearrange themselves. "And the Zarathi weapon?" "Eliminated along with their capability to replicate it," Sarah reported. "The quantum feedback destroyed not just the weapon but the research data and the scientists who developed it. They're back to conventional armaments. Which means we can fight them on equal terms," Admiral Rodriguez said with satisfaction. "Commander Chen, Captain Nightwind, I'm recommending both of you for commendations. Also, I'm assigning you as permanent liaison officers between human and Sylvani forces." Sarah exchanged glances with Zara, sensing her partner's amusement through their quantum link. "Sir, I should probably mention that Captain Nightwind and I are now legally partnered according to Sylvani military protocols." "Legally partnered how?" "Married," Zara clarified helpfully. "Emergency battlefield marriages are binding under protectorate law, assuming both parties survive the engagement and confirm their intentions within 72 hours. Admiral Rodriguez stared at them. "You got married during a suicide mission?" "We got married while saving civilization," Sarah corrected. "The suicide mission was just the venue." 3 months later, Sarah stood in the observation deck of the new joint Human-Sylvani research station, watching ships from both civilizations work together to establish permanent diplomatic relations. The war with the Zarathi had ended not in conquest but in negotiation. Apparently, losing their superweapon had convinced them that humanity and its allies were more valuable as trading partners than targets. "Any regrets?" Zara asked, joining her at the viewport. Even after months of marriage, Sarah felt her pulse quicken at the sight of her wife in the elegant formal robes of a Sylvani diplomatic envoy. "About which part?" "Volunteering for a deadly reconnaissance mission, destroying an enemy superweapon with untested theoretical physics, or marrying someone I'd known for less than 48 hours. "Any of it." "All of it." Sarah considered the question seriously. The quantum exposure had permanently changed her. She could now perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously, her tactical thinking operated at levels that occasionally frightened her colleagues, and she was probably no longer entirely human by any strict biological definition. But she could also sense Zara's presence like a constant song at the edge of consciousness. Their shared tactical awareness had revolutionized joint military operations between their species, and every morning she woke up next to someone who thought her directness was charming rather than unprofessional. "Only one regret," Sarah said finally. "Which is?" "That I waited until we were about to die before telling you I thought you were dazzling." Sarah turned to face her wife, noting how Zara's ears twitched with pleased embarrassment even after months of similar compliments. "I should have said it the moment you blushed in the briefing room." "Well," Zara said, moving closer with that dancer's grace that still made Sarah's heart skip, "you have the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." "Is that a challenge, Captain Nightwind?" "It's a promise, Commander Chen. And Sylvani always keep their promises." Sarah kissed her wife while their two civilizations built a future together around them, quantum fields humming in harmony with hearts that had found their perfect tactical match. In her professional opinion, it was the most successful mission she'd ever undertaken.